Hi, morning everyone. I hope you've been practicing. I don't know, a lot of you have had some fantastic lockdown haircuts going on. As you can see, I need one. It's all getting a little bit hectic here. I've been trying to wear a hat, but I've been told by my wonderful girlfriend that wearing hats doesn't suit me, so I need to get it off. So I'm going to need to try and find some scissors from somewhere or some hair clippers or something. So I need to get it sorted out. But anyway, today's lesson is all about the shuffle. I've done a lesson using some more advanced techniques for the shuffle, but some of you would never have seen one before or heard one before. Or if you have, we haven't gone deep into it because of the fact that in reality, a lot of the time in modern music, we don't hear shuffles anymore, which is sad. If you go back in time, there was loads of shuffles you could use. Um, and one song that I think you should have a little listen to is have a little listen to, a couple of things. You want to listen to Quincy Jones, Let the Good Times Roll, from the album Q's Juke Joint, which is an awesome shuffle. The drummer's John Robinson. It's amazing. The other one, which I think you'll have fun playing to, is have a listen to Stevie Wonder, Isn't She Lovely? They are great play-alongs for you for these exercises. Now, I know last time we talked about with these lessons, we talked about using any gear you can have, any cushions and so forth. But today I will do it on the drums. But of course, you could do this on your cushions or wherever. So the pattern we're looking at when we're talking about a shuffle, okay, is rather than it being straight, that's what we call a straight rhythm, okay, straight eighth notes. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and. Every note is evenly spaced between each other. They're called straight eighth notes or straight quavers. And obviously we use that for a lot of things in music, you name it. Now, whenever we get involved with this thing that's called a shuffle, or sometimes it can be called a swing rock, if you look at the Art of the Drummer book, there's lots and lots of different terminology people use for it. Now, it's kind of, if I'm being black and white, the other way we play the drums. We kind of play straight notes, and we play what's called a shuffle. Now, a shuffle goes, instead of it being straight, we have a little gap between each note. So the first note's longer. And that's quite a good way of thinking of it. The first note is longer. So it goes long, short, 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 long, and round and round in a circle. So the key is it starts with a long note. Long, short, long, short, long, short, long. Now, that's quite a good way of thinking of it, because if you think of the first note as being long, it should hopefully mean that you don't end up putting that next note in a little bit early. And two, it should help you to make sure you don't flip it around. Because a lot of people, it's very easy to do it. You flip around the short and the long, and it all gets a little bit confused. So think of the first note as being long. Now, one way that I've been using it in my teaching to get people to hear it is, if you think of the rhythm as being hump, t, dump, t, hump, t, dump, t, hump, t, dump, t, hump, t, dump, t. So the hump and the dump are both long. Hump, t, dump, t, hump, t, dump, t. Now, what we're going to do, so we can put it into a whole beat, the bass drum is going to go with hump. Hump, T. Okay? Hump, T, dump, T, hump, T, dump, T, bass, 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 T, dump. Now, the snare drum is going to go with the dump. So it's going to go hump, T, dump, T, hump, T, dump, T, hump, T, dump, T, hump, T, dump, T, hump, T, dump, Okay, so you can play that. Obviously, you can play that anywhere. On your cushions. If you have got drums, this will work great. Put it on the ride cymbal. If you want to go a bit 70s glam rock, put it on the floor tom. Okay? Work it round, just get used to it. Start slow, get used to that note being long, and I promise you, you'll whip it up in tempo in no time. So, shuffles. Let's talk about, just quickly before we end, where can we hear this? Where can we hear this mystical shuffle? Well, you're going to hear it, of course, in a lot of pop songs, as I've just said. Maybe not recently. Maybe if you go back 20, 30 years, there'll be lots of songs that your mum and dad know. Listen to them. As I say, there's "Don't Stop" by Fleetwood Mac. There's another one off the top of my head. I'm sure there's loads. Blues. Listen to some blues. Stick on the best of B.B. King. You'll definitely hear some shuffles. Now, the other thing is we use it a lot in. If you think about reggae. We're using it there. Hip hop. Loads of funk things we're going to use it in. We use it in so many different ways. It's not just to do with it being some kind of, oh, it's only for old music. We use it all the time. Jazz is built up upon that. So it's very important that we learn it. But go through those initial exercises, the ones I've just shown you. So on the hi-hat, on the ride, and then on the floor tom. If you haven't got drums, on your cushion, and then you're stamping the floor with your foot. We've tried that this week with a few people. Get used to it, get it flowing, enjoy it. The shuffle's a great thing. I'll see you on the next one. All the best. Bye bye.